Have you seen the new sculptures over at Westcott Park in Michigan City? In honor of an amazing person, Naomi Bowman Talbert Anderson. This is going to be her story. It's about things that happened when she was young, and how things that happen when you are young can change the direction of your whole life and help you to turn lots of things around. My name is Cheryl Chapman. I am an author of children's picture books, and I started the Book Grandmas program and library over at Neiman School here in Michigan City. Today I will be reading a biography that I've written about Naomi Bowman Talbert Anderson. And for our poetess,
hello, I'm Carnessa the Poetess, and today I will be reading from Naomi Anderson's work, and I'm so honored to do so.
And together we will be bringing you Naomi Anderson's story. They say that if you listen closely, you can hear them, like echoes, the whispers of your long ago ancestors, of history, the words and deeds passed down from their hearts, their souls, and their hands, echoing the very best of their lives. You might not have photos. You may never have gotten to hold their hands or hear their voices. They say these whispers are a little louder, a little clearer whenever a new baby is born. This story is dedicated to our ancestors whose still echoing whispers have shaped our lives and our American celebrations. To learn about Naomi Anderson, we have to go back in time about 200 years to the year of 1843, March 1st to be exact, when she was born right here in Michigan City. Imagine those days when Michigan City was a pioneer town. The roads and sidewalks were made out of wooden planks because of all the sand. There were no cars, bicycles weren't even invented yet. You would either have to ride a horse or you could have your own 2 feet, basically. So the families had horses and buggies. Downtown only had a few stores, a hotel, a bank, a newspaper office, a school, a few churches, and of course the homes of all the pioneers, all the pioneering people that lived there. Some homes were log cabins. When the young Naomi lived here, if you went off to where the Nipsco plant is today, you would see a 200-foot tall sand dune. Later on, they named this sand dune the Hoosier Slide. So if you know Michigan City history, you might have heard of it. If you were big enough and brave enough and had a lot of energy, you could even climb to the top of that dune, and you would feel like you could see into forever. That was the pioneer spirit. Elijah and Julianne Bowman were her parents. She had an older brother, Mark, and a younger sister, Mary. Most people who lived here back then were European immigrant families. The Bowmans were born as free black persons, one of only 2 black families in town. Since this was during the time of slavery, the family often talked about how important it would be for all Americans to be free, just as their family was. Mrs. Bowman was very religious and taught her children stories from the Bible. A favorite was the story about a man called Moses who led his people out of slavery and into the promised land. Little Naomi thought that America should be everybody's promised land. She thought it very respectful to be called a person of color, but most of all, she was proud to be an American.
We should insist on being called Americans of color. There should be no German Americans, Irish Americans, or African Americans. All who were born in this country are Americans, and I, a person of color, have just as much right to claim that as does any white man or woman.
Most pioneers were dreaming of the riches they could make in Michigan City. They had a harbor, there were forests for lumber, farmlands. Our Naomi grew up dreaming about the riches of freedom and equal rights for everyone in America. This was partly because life was not fair for her. She was really smart and she really wanted to go to school. But in those days, the school was for white children only. So Naomi's mother had to hire a tutor. She worked her hardest and she became a really good writer. But not being able to go to school just wasn't fair. It was time to turn things around. Naomi did have friends at church and in town, so she shared the stories and poems that she wrote with her friends. In turns, her friends spoke up for her, and guess what? When she was 12 years old, she was finally invited to go to Michigan City's public school. The lesson she learned here: when the rules aren't fair, they need to be changed.
Heaven's greatest blessing here, education, you will find, will bring our latent talents up on a level with mankind.
Time passed. Naomi became a teenager, and in school she studied hard and she prepared herself to go to college. But tragically, when she was only 17, her mother died. So her father asked her to drop out of school and take over the household. Once again, life wasn't fair, and her dreams of college disappeared. Then, when she turned 18, America's Civil War began. Her brother, Mark, signed up to fight in the war. When she was 20, Naomi married William Talbert, who was also a free black person and a barber from Valparaiso. But the times became even a little bit sadder. Soon after the marriage, her younger sister passed away from illness, and then Mark died down in Florida fighting in the Civil War. And the Talbert's first child, a little girl, a baby called Temperance, she died as well. Maybe her heart was broken, maybe, but Mrs. Talbert knew, as her mother's daughter, that it was time to turn things around again. No matter what, she decided to always work for fair and just lives for all women and children. But how? Well, maybe she hadn't gone to college, but she was a good writer, a poet, and a speaker, so she turned her life around. And she had her family move to Chicago. In the meantime, America began to turn it around too. President Abraham Lincoln freed the people from slavery, and the Civil War was won. When that happened, Mrs. Talbert felt like she was standing on top of Michigan City's giant sand dune and could see into forever.
We come with gratitude to all who lent a hand to save our starry banner floating high from floating o'er slave.
It made Mrs. Talbert sad that drinking too much alcohol was ruining people's lives. So in Chicago, she worked with the temperance movement. This was the movement to try and stop alcohol abuse. There were no patriotic groups that would welcome the families of Civil War soldiers of color, so she helped organize a new branch of the Ladies of the Grand Army of the Republic so that their loved ones too could be honored.
We're free to do as all may do, all o'er this mighty land, and will serve both state and country as justice doth demand.
In many towns where she lived, there were only orphanages for white children, so wherever Mrs. Talbert lived, she founded homes for children of color.
We are Americans. We are not God's people if we feel race prejudice. I have studied the race question since I was 9 years old. I am opposed to separate schools, churches, barbershops, or separate anything else that makes us a separate people.
In the years that she lived in Michigan City, only white men could vote. After the Civil War, African American men gained the right to vote too. Mrs. Talbert then made the most important turnaround of her entire lifetime. Since women would never be equal to men if they didn't have the right to vote, she decided to become a suffragist. This means she worked for the right of women to vote.
The daughters of today want the ballot because it is power and it will give them social equality.
Her first big speech, which made her famous nationwide, was in Chicago. She used the story her mother had told her about Moses. She told all of America that the same God who helped Moses free his people would make sure that women could have their freedom through the right to vote.
Woman has power within herself, and the God that reigns above, who commanded Moses to lead the children of Israel from out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, who walked the waters of the Red Sea, who furnished Abraham Lincoln with knowledge to write the Emancipation Proclamation, whereby 4 million of blacks were set free. That God, our God, is with and for us and will hear the call of woman, and her rights will be granted, and she shall be permitted to vote.
After living in Chicago, the family moved to Ohio, the state where her parents came from. More tragedy struck though. Her husband, William, became ill and died, but still, Mrs. Talbert carried on as an activist and worked as a hairdresser to support her family. A few years later, she married Mr. Lewis Anderson, who had been freed from slavery, and they decided to move to Wichita, Kansas. He was a businessman. One Christmas time in Wichita, many people only wanted to donate food to the white children's orphanage. Mrs. Anderson knew that she would have to convince people to stop ignoring children just because of the color of their skin. She wrote a powerful letter to the newspaper and asked everyone to give a good holiday to the orphans that she lovingly called God's little black lambs.
The parents of colored children will donate liberally, and that there be any white children kind enough to give to us, that they will place on their bags Colored Children's Home, and only such bags are marked be sent to us. God is able to care for black lambs as well as white.
Once again, with the power of her writing, Naomi had turned it around. In 1895, the family moved to California, where Naomi Anderson joined other important leaders like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. These women were all suffragists, and they dedicated their lives to turning America around through the women's suffrage movement. She often said,
"If I can serve the cause I love, I ask no greater happiness."
The rest of Naomi Bowman Talbert Anderson's life was filled with lecturing and writing for newspapers throughout America. By the time her life ended on June 9, 1899, America was on its way to change. Because of her optimistic and hopeful work, she empowered so many others. And in 1920, American women finally won the right to vote. Her work for equality has been given to others, people like your teachers, your family, journalists, filmmakers, authors, illustrators, poets, sculptors, like here in Michigan City. And her work is for you. Thank you for listening to her story.
Think about what matters. Ponder, what is fair? Question, what is not fair? When you are old enough to vote, will you?
So we are passing Ms. Anderson's words on to you in your own growing up years. And we celebrate you because, as little Naomi knew, we all have a future to win together.
Then let us give to God the praise for all that has been done, for giving us this land of bliss, the best beneath the sun.